Tonight on Talking Points, former Cuomo aide Joseph Percoco is on trial for various cases of corruption. The defense is expected to make a lengthy case. We'll break down the specifics on Percoco's situation.
The DACA program expires in under 2 weeks. President Trump is rejecting all legislation that does not also narrow legal immigration. We'll discuss what solutions Congress can come up with to appease the president.
And we might have a new national security advisor. Find out what has gone wrong for H.R. McMaster. This is Talking Points. Some breaking news tonight. The governor of Missouri has been indicted after allegations of sexual misconduct and blackmail. Good evening, I'm Mike Riccadi.
And I'm Josh Carney. Governor Eric Greitens was charged for a felony invasion of privacy. Reports say he threatened to leak nude pictures of a woman he was having an affair with. We'll have this more with details as they come in.
And earlier today, special counsel Robert Mueller introduced new charges against Paul Manafort and Rick Gates. The new charges include tax and bank fraud and are the latest action in Mueller's year-long investigation. Last Friday, 13 Russian nationals and 3 Russian companies were indicted by Mueller as well. The special counsel has accused them of conspiring and using false instruments and computer hacking to interfere with the 2016 presidential election.
Employees of the Internet Research Agency, a so-called Russian troll farm, allegedly used fake bank accounts, websites, and names, organized U.S. rallies, and released humiliating information about Hillary Clinton. The New York Times released a report stating that their Russian sources have revealed that more than 1,000 people in Russia were involved in this project over 3 years. President Trump has publicly stated that there was no collusion on his part as this anti-U.S. campaign began in 2014. Although this was a Russian operation, there is no official evidence that the Russian government was responsible for this project.
And here to break down what the most recent guilty plea and last week's indictments mean for the investigation moving forward are Talking Points analysts Dan Prager and Jack Watson. Guys, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks. Great to be here.
Now, Alex van der Zwaan, the lawyer, has pleaded guilty. Jack, what does this mean for the Mueller investigation going forward?
Well, Mike, we're beginning to see a little bit of a pattern here with these guilty pleas. Every single one of the guilty pleas so far in the recent days, van der Zwaan, including van der Zwaan and Michael Flynn, have been lying to the FBI. They have admitted to basically perjuring themselves when giving details about their involvement in the 2016 campaign and with Bob Mueller's investigation.
Yeah, that's the big thing, is that they're catching more and more people in lies. And it's not just that these people, because for the most part they're minor players. Van der Zwaan is a very minor player in this. It's more that they're catching more people in lies and they're saying, looking back and saying, hey, who else is lying?
If we're looking at pattern recognition in that regard, who can we expect the probe to target next?
Carter Page, I think, is the big name that they're going to go after next. Page is the guy that was named in the Nunes memo recently, but more importantly, he's had a lot of ties to the Russian government, trying to set up meetings between Trump and Russia. It is important to remember that the Russian government and Page have had ties before, and actually, surprisingly enough, the Russian government interviewed him to be an agent a couple years back. They rejected him, calling him too much of an idiot, and those are their words, not mine, to be part of this. So that is a little bit of an interesting fact there.
Page is the logical pick here, but it's also important to remember that Rick Gates, who was a campaign aide in Trump's campaign, in 2016 campaign, he's expected, according to multiple sources, to plead guilty here. It'll be interesting to see what, after a plea deal, after what he gives Mueller about, in my opinion, what would be probably the biggest fish so far, Paul Manafort, who has already been indicted, however, but it's going to be interesting to see what happens.
And speaking of those indictments, Dan, what has been the response from President Trump and the White House as a whole?
Of course, it's the no collusion that he shouts out on Twitter all the time. But it is important to remember that this Russia investigation is not all about Trump. It's just about looking into Russia's actions in the events of the election. Paul Manafort and Rick Gates, a lot of what they're doing has very little to do with their time as in the Trump campaign. It happened long before. So when you're looking at van der Zwaan, his lying to the FBI probably hurts Manafort and Gates' case more than it hurts Trump. So that can be separate. They can be guilty without Trump being, but it is a bad sign that Trump saw these things and still invited them into their campaign.
Let's talk about those 13 indictments for a second of those Russians that are accused of meddling. Do we expect more indictments to come of it?
I certainly would, because it's an important thing to remember that The main thing that Mueller is after here, he's not after Donald Trump, he's not after any specific person. He is assigned to look into Russian meddling, and that's specifically what he's charging these 13 people with. So it's going to be interesting to see if we see many more of these similarly.
Exactly. Mueller works slow. He's very meticulous. This is just the first round. You're going to see more.
Well, obviously, it's just beginning. There's still a lot more to go. We'll always be watching it here on Talking Points. Dan and Jack, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you.
And after the break, we'll discuss the ongoing trial of Joseph Percoco and the incoming deadline for DACA permits. Don't go away.
It's on block, boys.
Well, Thomas, you've got prediabetes. But with more exercise and a change in diet, it can be reversed.
I've tried exercising. It just makes me hungry for bacon.
I love bacon, too. And who really likes to exercise?
Not me.
Me neither.
Nobody. So we're good?
What? Oh, you still have prediabetes. Big time.
Here's your check. Oh, you got it.
You know, since I got rid of my car, I really enjoy walking.
Okay. Got it. No.
Getting pulled over for buzz driving could cost you around $10,000 in fines, legal fees, and increased insurance rates.
Oh, you're home early. You live with your mom?
That'll set your game back a few years. Buzzed, busted, and broke. Because buzz driving is drunk driving.
Come on, it's not that hard.
My big man fingers are having a problem with these little tiny buttons.
Whoa, watch it there. Your blood pressure's gonna go through the roof.
Tell me about it. I'm trying to learn how to get it down. Instead, it keeps going up.
High blood pressure can increase the risk for heart attack or stroke. Learn how to keep yours at a healthy range.
Ever hear a voice command? Just say text barbershop to 97779.
That's not what I said.
Just give me that. Now my blood pressure's up.
Today, the prosecution rested their case in the New York corruption trial against former aide to the governor, Joseph Percoco. He stands accused of accepting over $300,000 in bribes from business executives looking for his help on their ventures in New York. Percoco's defense now preparing to deliver their side of the case and have named 23 potential witnesses. Here to walk us through the first 5 weeks of this trial and what we can expect from the defense is Talking Points analyst Conor Wight.
Thanks, Josh. For over a month, the prosecution has attempted to prove that company's Competitive Power Venture and Syracuse-based Core Development bribed Joseph Percoco. The prosecution says Competitive Power Venture executive Peter Kelly gave a job to Percoco's wife, paying $90,000 a year to secure Percoco's assistance in the construction of a power plant in the Hudson Valley. The prosecution also alleges that Core Development executives Stephen Aiello and Joseph Girardi paid $35,000 in bribes to help their various projects along. The executives allegedly wanted Percoco's help to overturn a state development restriction holding up construction. The prosecution's star witness, Todd Howe, presented an interesting development earlier this month. The former lobbyist with ties to Percoco and Governor Cuomo was arrested mid-trial. Howe allegedly helped to oversee the exchange of bribe money and described Percoco as corrupt in his testimony. Howe has previously pled guilty to 8 bribery-related felonies. During the defense's cross-examination, Howe admitted to breaking a cooperation agreement he reached with the government in September, leading to his arrest. The defense now looks toward 23 potential witnesses and a strategy of discrediting the prosecution's arguments.
So, Connor, you mentioned those potential witnesses. Who are some of the bigger names in that?
Some of the bigger names are Lisa Percoco, the wife that I mentioned who received a job. She'll be working to try to clear some of the more damning allegations that some of her co-employees said on their testimony, saying she was unqualified, didn't interview for the job, and that her replacement was paid over 3 times less than she was. We're also going to have some government officials that the defense will hope to sort of clear up any involvement that the government may have had, or any illegal activity that the government may have had in pushing through some of these contracts. And interestingly enough, the lawyers of the Core Development executives, Stephen Aiello and Girardi, may also take the stand.
Now, Connor, as I understand it, they are also implicated in another corruption case. How do you think this may impact the defense's decision?
They are. They'll also be defendants in the so-called Buffalo Billions case, which is going to take place in April. This is a case with very similar, with a very similar premise. It's more development companies that allegedly paid bribes in order to receive state development contracts. And the defense is concerned that the lawyers on the prosecution side in cross-examination are going to take them down that rabbit hole to show, hey, they're involved in more than just one thing. That's got to point to something.
And this corruption case is obviously one of several happening centered around Albany. So what does that necessarily mean for Cuomo and the sort of political entities that exist there? How will it affect them?
It's not good for Governor Cuomo. To be clear, he's not actually being accused of anything legal-wise. However, Republicans are already latching on to this. He's up for re-election this November, and this doesn't look good. It's, you have Todd Howe has good connections to him. Joseph Percoco has been described as many, including the governor himself, as his right-hand man. It really doesn't look good. It's something that his opponents are going to be able to spin.
Well, Connor, the governor is up for re-election in 2019. He also may run for president in 2020, so these sort of corruption allegations could dog him in that campaign as well.
Certainly something we're going to be taking a look at and keeping us posted here. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you.
The case and the one surrounding Joseph Percoco seems to be part of a trend of corruption, and so the
last September, President Trump ended the DACA program and set a deadline of March 5th for Congress to find a solution for Dreamers. After a week of open debates in the Senate,
Congress failed to act on DACA, leaving the face of Dreamers uncertain. Talking Points Analyst Sabrina Maggiore is here to tell us more about the future of DACA and the March 5th deadline fast as it approaches. Sabrina, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me.
So what exactly does this March 5th deadline mean?
So politically, the March 5th deadline is very significant. It's essentially a date that President Trump set, urging Congress to get some sort of legislation passed by then. Policy-wise, it is essentially an inflection point, meaning that at this point, a series of DACA permits are going to expire. And we have a graph that essentially explains that. There's 122 DACA permits that will expire each day, and that's happened since October. 22,000 permits total will expire by March 5th, and after March 5th, we're going to see 668,000 additional permits expiring.
And Sabrina, we've seen several decisions on the federal court level. How do you think this is going to impact the deadline, if at all?
So 2 federal judges, one in New York and the other in California, ordered an injunction on this deadline. And what that did was essentially allow the U.S. to renew DACA applications starting immediately. Trump asked the Supreme Court to hear an appeal of this, and the Supreme Court hasn't acted. And what that means now for Congress is that there's a little bit less pressure for them to pass legislation immediately. For Dreamers, on the other hand, they're still eligible to reapply for DACA permits, but the problem is these reapplication process takes a long time, and during this time, they could see deportation proceedings starting.
And in terms of some of those legislative solutions, what is Congress debating and prioritizing?
So right now, when the Senate resumes, we're going to see temporary measures essentially being brought to the table. Jeff Flake said that he's going to bring a temporary measure called the 3 for 3. He said that he'll renew DACA for 3 years in exchange for funding of the border wall for 3 years. We saw permanent efforts not pass in the Senate last week, where we could see those same measures brought to the table again and see sort of renegotiation and whipping to try and get people to come aboard on those measures as well.
Sabrina, with March 5th near on the horizon, obviously we're going to be watching it here. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Coming up, we'll discuss and break down the relations between the United States and Turkey, as well as tensions in the Indian Ocean. Stay tuned.
Your daughter just had her first breakup. Do you A, put yourself in her shoes? B, console her?
Don't worry, sweetie. This is gonna happen a lot.
Or C, find her a new boyfriend?
Nice, single boys. That was weird.
As a parent, there are no perfect answers. But you don't have to be perfect to be a perfect parent. Thousands of teens in foster care will love you just the same.
You've messed up your son's haircut.
Mom?
Do you A, try to fix it?
Like it never happened.
B, work with what you got? Or C, show solidarity?
Thank you, baby.
As a parent, there are no perfect answers. But you don't have to be perfect to be a perfect parent. Thousands of teens in foster care will love you just the same.
I see you mobbing over her. Let's go. Let's mob. Let's crawl. Let's crawl. Let's crawl. Hey, yo, we mobbing. Come on, girl. Let's crawl. Hey, yo, let's crawl.
They've done it 7
Hey, yo,
times.
let's crawl. Hey, let's crawl. Hey, yo, let's crawl.
The relationship between Turkey and the United States has diminished over the last several weeks. After approaching the brink of a crisis, the United States and Turkey pulled back and agreed to improve strained relations. The tensions that existed involved matters of foreign policy, particularly in Syria. Talking Points Analyst Thomas St. Hilaire is here to talk about what all of this means. Thomas, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you very much.
Now, tensions in the region are running extremely high. What are the disagreements over policy in Syria exactly?
Right. Well, the main disagreement, I guess you could say, could actually really boil down to one sentence, which is the fact that Turkey's launching a full assault against the Kurds in Syria, and they happen to be the United States' primary ally in combating the Islamic State. Now, this is obviously not a very new conflict. We've been hearing about it actually over the last several years, but it's been escalating, and that's the biggest thing here. And the reason that it's escalating is when you look at the region right now, that both countries have taken this foreign policy approach of they're going to pursue their own foreign policy, they're going to pursue their own interests. When it gets to the point where they're both on the same battlefields, that's obviously where you run into the same conflict, and that's why these two countries are really at odds about this.
And why does this disagreement cause so much tension and cause it to be so high? Why are tempers there?
Well, I think one of the biggest things is you're seeing that the United States is playing less of a role right now in the sense that, again, it's been pursuing this foreign policy where it's really been pursuing its own agenda, which is to defeat the Islamic State militants. And on top of that, they have a very different perception of what the Kurds stand for. I mean, in Turkey, they view them as violent separatists. They view them as a threat to national security. The United States views them as a very formidable ally in combating the Islamic State. So naturally, when you have these two different views on this one group, you're going to have these really high tensions, and they're not going to get better when you don't discuss them or address them.
And Thomas, some of the conflict has been resolved. How exactly were all the players within these tensions able to accomplish that?
Right. Well, I mean, the biggest thing here is, now some of it, to be clear, is being postponed. So it's not a complete resolution, but both countries have come to terms that they want to get this solved. So while I think both countries would want to, over the last week or so to come out with concrete policies to address this, they are in agreement that both countries cannot take care of this alone. They have to work together in solving the problems that they're dealing with.
And can we expect those improvements to continue, or does this sort of look like it's going to be ongoing?
That's tough to say because right now, I mean, we've seen that these tensions have been extremely high for a very long time. So it's going to take a lot of change. Now, I think there is reason to believe that there will be improvement because both countries, we've seen Secretary of State Rex Tillerson come out and be very clear that he wants to work with Turkey, make change, and have an improved relationship because these two countries do not want to be in this conflict with one another.
Thomas St. Hilaire, thanks for being here.
Hey, thank you very much.
The beaches of the Seychelles are typically a vacation spot. However, the Indian government uses them as a key strategic military location to limit Chinese influence in the Indian Ocean. The Chinese, however, have built their own bases in India's sphere of influence. Here with more on the growing tensions is Talking Points analyst Joey Lino. Joseph, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Now, how does this base that India is constructing in the Seychelles, how is that going to help them protect their interests?
Well, so in recent years, China has been building bases in the Indian Ocean along strategic shipping lanes within the Indian Ocean, specifically near the Suez Canal in the Maldives. Most recently, they've been building bases in Sri Lanka and Djibouti. And India sees this expansion of Chinese influence in the Indian Ocean as a threat against their interests in the Indian Ocean. And they see the new base in the Seychelles as a way of securing their interests in the region.
Do you believe because of those threats that we will see tensions continue to rise?
Well, both. See, China is pursuing their foreign policy initiative of One Belt, One Road, which is an attempt to bring Asian economies into more cohesion with each other. However, India is pursuing a similar initiative. However, both countries seem to want to really be at the forefront of this conjoining of the Asian economies, and that could lead to a lot more tense situations down the road.
And these bases being built on the Seychelles and the Maldives, what's been the response from people there on the ground that live there?
Well, so they are, as these small islands start to become larger players in a larger geopolitical conflict, there is local resistance in both locations. People in the Maldives asserting that China is taking advantage of the heavy debt the Maldives owes to them to use infrastructure there, while people in the Seychelles would rather remain a small island nation and not a pawn in a larger geopolitical conflict.
All right, Joseph Lino, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you.
And after the break, we'll take a look at some stories you may have missed. Stay with us.
Taking care of a family member can lead to plenty of questions. Fortunately, there's a place to get the answers, for them and for you. Find articles, tips, and tools from experts and others who have been in your place. The Caregiving Resource Center at aarp.org/caregiving.
Looking for these? You drive buzzed. It could be one very expensive ride.
First, you gotta make bail. Then pay me to get your car back.
Your insurance premiums will go through the roof.
And my legal fees just keep adding up. All told, it could end up costing you $10,000.
Buzzed, busted, and broke. Because buzz driving is drunk driving.
It's a beautiful day out here. Sunny today with light breezes, giving way to clouds in the afternoon. We could see some light precipitation to moderate precipitation later on, followed by powerful storm-like conditions. 90 miles per hour winds are expected. Authorities are asking everyone, stay indoors.
Come on, that's it. Let's go.
Some stories don't receive the mainstream coverage they deserve. This week on Talking Points, we revisit the Pennsylvania district map and the opening of the Egyptian border.
Republicans have submitted an emergency application in an attempt to block the implementation of the new Pennsylvania congressional map released by the state Supreme Court. The Pennsylvania GOP believes that the court violated its authority by drawing the map and are requesting the interference of the U.S. Supreme Court. State Republicans also say that the court did not give lawmakers enough time to draw a meaningful state map.
This map is set to be used in 2018 and 2020 elections and is predicted to increase the competitiveness of the elections. This map would also give Democrats a better opportunity to win district seats that are presently held by Republicans. This comes after the court stated in January that the congressional map that has been in effect since 2011 benefited the GOP so much that it violated the state's constitution.
And today, Egypt opened its narrow border with Gaza at the Rafah crossing point, in a rare move that will allow thousands of Palestinians and many foreign nationals to enter the country. Many of those making the crossing today have been trapped in the small enclave for over a year, often without access to proper medical care or housing. Passage through the border has been highly restricted since 2013 due to security concerns in Egypt, where many government officials accuse Hamas of aiding rebels in the ongoing Sinai insurgency.
A wait list of nearly 30,000 Gazans has formed with only a small percentage guaranteed entry. Since Israeli forces imposed a blockade on Gaza over 10 years ago, the Rafah crossing has been one of the only viable passages out of the country. Last year, the crossing was open for only 36 days, seriously limiting the ability of many to leave the conflict-prone region. Now, anxious travelers hope for their name to be called and for to be able to leave that region that has held them hostage.
And after the break, Josh and I will preview which stories we're looking forward to. We'll be back in 60 seconds.
Got a quarter?
We are nearly 2 weeks away from a new round of elections in Italy. By Italian law, no polling can be published in the final 2 weeks, leaving much still up in the air. With nearly 1/3 of voters undecided, 3 major coalitions led by Silvio Berlusconi's center-right party, the left-leaning Partito Democratico, and anti-establishment Movimento 5 Stelle are in a near-dead heat. And these elections are ever so important, having the potential to decide the future of Italy in terms of their membership in the EU. Next week, make sure to stay tuned when I interview Professor Glenn Morgan from Turin, Italy.
President Donald Trump's national security advisor, H.R. McMaster, could be leaving the administration and returning to a military role in the coming days. McMaster has been on thin ice with the administration for months. This move is not a major surprise, as a similar change was considered in the fall of 2017. The concern then and now is optics. This fall, it would have been 3 national security advisors in a span of a year. Now the concern for the administration is starting 2018 the same way, with no reliable perspective in that role. I'll be looking ahead to how this eventual move affects the administration and who will be the next choice. Lots of speculation, lots of ideas, and it seems as if they're trying to find a 4-star general and transition him back to a military role. But ultimately, this comes down to how this will affect the administration and how the administration will be able to move on and find another solidified role to give them counsel in this regard. And to this point, they haven't had that, and it's critical moving forward in this next year that they do. So it'll come down to whether or not Trump is prepared to kind of go at it alone with a lot of this information and have John Kelly by his side, or if he'll rely on somebody outside.
Well, Josh, like you said, a large part of it is the optics. It's the timing. Obviously, you know, it would be a lot if they were to do it last fall, but I still feel like 3 times in the last year or so is still pretty, I mean, that's pretty chaotic if you're in the White House right now. And like you said, they're probably going to be looking for a 4-star general. Obviously, they've been keeping this very quiet.
Yeah, the search has been pretty silent.
There has not been many names thrown out there, but I would have to think, you know, if they're going to replace H.R. McMaster, they must have somebody in mind. Obviously, they're just not saying who it is, because you're not just, a position like that, you're not just going to make vacant and not have a replacement up and ready to go.
Certainly chaotic, but not necessarily out of the ordinary. There's been vast transition. There's been a lot of situations involved with that position that have caused some stirs for the administration. It's a matter of not if they'll be able to rebound and move on because they've been able to do that. It's a matter of whoever is going to fill that role, what kind of counsel are they going to provide? How is that going to shift the administration and change the decorum when it comes to national security? If it makes a difference, if it doesn't, remains to be seen. But that, I think, is something they're looking to find outside of H.R. McMaster that they haven't had.
Obviously, somebody that they may consider is somebody like the chairman of the Joint Chiefs. But obviously, you know, all of these positions, they work together. Trump does need, you know, his trusted allies at his side. Somebody, you said, John Kelly, is very important to him. So, you know, he does have his people in place. But a position like this, you still need somebody, you know, he needs to find the right guy. Or I worry that moving ahead, policy could be, you know, sort of up in the air if they can't get this figured out in a timely manner.
Not only policy up in the air for the administration, but also how will this affect whatever H.R. McMaster moves to? Kind of how will this affect the transition in multiple fronts? You have the White House, you have the Pentagon, you have military operations here and abroad. So it's imperative that they sort this out swiftly and that they find a replacement and align it with their core message so that they can continue uninterrupted.
Well, obviously, you know, H.R. McMaster getting dropped from this role, it's going to be a demotion from him. But honestly, the way that other people have come out of the White House, sometimes for them, they're happy to do so because, you know, things have been so chaotic, I feel, these last couple of months with so many revolving doors. But we're going to leave the conversation there for now. And that's all we have tonight for Talking Points. Thanks for watching.
Check out our webisodes and articles on CitrusTV.com/talking points.
And make sure to tune in next week for a brand new episode of Talking Points. For Talking Points, I'm Mike Riccadi.
And I'm Josh Carney. Have a good night, Syracuse.